Today is a little bit more of a speculation than an actual theory, and that is because it's mixing a lot more of what is barely known in the lore with what we've heard Dorian say within the Inquisition and what we see within the World of Thedas books in and of themselves. This video is over the actual fall, or multiple falls, of Arlathon, or as the actual kingdom was called, or empire, Elvenon. What makes this kind of confusing is we have two different stories. The one that Solus tells us, where he's actually the one who destroys Elvenon, and the one that we know from the Imperium history, where the Imperium believes that they are the ones to have destroyed Arlathon and caused the sinking and the downfall of the Elves. As Dorian stated, it is one of the proudest moments of the Imperium, although it really shouldn't be. He even says that himself. And I went digging through my World of Thedas book again, because I did it once before for the lore video over the timeline. And I found the two dates which coincide with the downfall of Arlathon as far as the Imperium is concerned, and that it is negative 981 Ancient, when the Imperium and the Elves went into open war, and negative 975 Ancient, when the Imperium sank the city of Arlathon. Now, there's multiple theories about whether or not Arlathon is within the Fade. However, what we do know right now is at the point in time that the war and the fall of what the Imperium says they did happened, it is a very, very long time after Solus caused the Fade and the mortal realm to split. With this, we now see a lot of conflictions, because Solus says he caused it, or he kind of caused it with the war with all of the gods and himself, supposed gods and himself, and where we see the Imperium says that they caused the downfall of Arlathon and became the power of Thedas. Anyways, we don't know which one's truth and which one's not, because at this point we are in 549 Dragon, which is a good several thousand years after the fall of Arlathon as far as the Tevinter Imperium is concerned. Again, which one is truth and which one is lie? We know that history in and of itself can end up being very convoluted. History is the winner writes down what they are, or the country in and of itself will, and it is built up to inspire a lot of patriotism. It goes for just about any country with this matter. The Elvan of the current timeline, the Dalish, and the City Elves both believe that the Imperium was what caused their downfall, not the Elven gods, or the trickster god, the Dreadwolf. The point that I'm getting at here is we could very well see that Arlathon and Elvenon could have ended up falling a long time after Solus actually split the world. In other words, yes, he's the one who destroyed the immortality of the Elves because it's directly linked to the Fade. However, the Elves in and of themselves, while a little bit broken after this, and probably more than a little bit scattered, would have still had their empire and still would have been able to rebuild some of it. It wouldn't have been nearly as strong and nearly as beautiful as the Elvenon that Solus came from, because without the connection to the Fade, the library that we see within Trespasser would end up not being there at all, because you can't have a library like that. And yes, they would have lost all of their history, which would have been devastating. The quickening in and of itself probably didn't take place instantaneously. It would have been slowly spread out throughout the generations, and thus we would see that over 1,000 years later, after the humans arrive and form Tevinter and have the Imperium coming around, that the Elves and the Imperium would start butting heads, and the actual timeline date when the Elves started noticing the quickening and withdrew from trade from both the dwarves and the humans could very well be true. Again, it would have taken a very long time for the Immortals to start feeling the loss of that immortality and be drawn out with their connection to the Fade weakening. And that is probably one of the reasons why we actually see so many Immortals, or near Immortals, come the time of the Inquisition, who entered Uthenera and were awoken again, such as in the Temple of Mythal, how we see Abelas and the rest of the Sentinels, how we see Solus, though he is technically considered a god within the lore, so that could be something else entirely as well. And it would also explain the split in who believes what on how the history fell. Solus has no knowledge of the world other than what he's gathered over the past year before he met the Inquisition. So by the time that Trespasser takes place, 3 years. He's been awake for a whole 3 years. 4 years. 4 years. Somewhere around there. And so, yeah, he can regain a lot of knowledge by entering the Fade, but he even stated himself that what he sees in the dream realm is spirits interpreting what happens at the battles and throughout history through the emotions of the people who were there. So again, we have more muddied history, as Solus put it, and thus what is truth and what is not. We could see that the Imperium believes that they defeated what remained of the Elven Empire. We could see that happening. And then with Solus and his belief, the true Elvenon fell at his hands when he destroyed and split the Fade from the physical realm. And he destroyed his people's culture, his people's immortality, and basically set his people on a decline since that time period. Because elves mating with humans or sleeping with humans produce a human, or as humans would call it, a half-blood, but they're still technically human. And when you see that, we also see that elves in and of themselves are basically slowly dying off. Not just because when they sleep with a human it produces a human, but also because immortals in and of themselves, in any type of structure that you see, the longer the lifespan of a being is, you end up having it such that their reproduction is affected. So given the fact the elves were immortal or very close to immortal, it would have affected how fast or how quickly they could reproduce, which meant that they would be having fewer and fewer children per year compared to, say, a human or even a dwarf who have a longer lifespan than a human. Thus, we also see that going into the Age of the Dragon, the Dalish don't have a lot of children in their camps. They do have children, but the generations are very small. One, because they want to keep it that way to avoid notice, and two, probably because they were once immortal people, immortal beings, which means that, yes, eventually their genetics would have been affected and they would have evolved to somewhat compensate for the fact that they were now mortal and had human-length lifespans. That type of effect would be very slow in happening, like with the immortality slowly fading from them and not being noticed until you look at the timeline that is put out, and 1,200 years before Andraste about, we end up having them finally noticing that they lost their immortality and are quickening to life. So as that happened, probably their population would have decreased for a time, and it wouldn't have been helped much by the fact that they became slaves to the Imperium after the war, but also with the fact that while it's slowly decreasing their lifespan, their genetics would kick in and slowly evolve to try and compensate for that. However, it wouldn't be fast enough to compensate for it. So the elves have been in a state of decline since before the war with the Imperium, is basically what I'm trying to get at here. Back with the fall of Elvenon, what we see happening here is not just a conflict in the history, but could actually be truth and difference of opinion, as I've stated. Solus believes he destroyed Elvenon back when he created the Veil, and the Tevinter believes that they destroyed Elvenon back when they sunk the great city of Arlathon. So with this, we actually could see that the Elven Empire was broken after Solus, but not destroyed, and built back up before the tensions between the Imperium grew too much with the elves, and war broke out, and then they sank maybe Arlathon too, if people believe the theory that Arlathon is actually the Black City, and ended up with them having only the survivors become enslaved, basically setting the course for the next 1,000 years. I would like to hear what you guys believe happened and hear your theories and thoughts over everything that was stated in this video in the comment section down below. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I shall see you in the next theory video.